Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth, and we go from global warming, cap and trade, to something that we talk a great deal about here on American Family Radio, which is the defense of marriage, traditional marriage, natural marriage as we know it. We talk about it because it is being challenged. Marriage between a man and a woman is being challenged. And the homosexual community has been quite vocal in their support for these policies and these changes. Despite the will of the people, they go through, it seems, even in California, where the will of the people defined marriage between a man and a woman in Prop 8 and protected it. But when we're talking about politics and going back and forth, it's something that could be at an arm's distance, certainly. It's a political discussion. But what happens when that discussion is not in the abstract, but at your dinner table? What as Christians are we to do? Well, Dr. Frank Moncher, our guest, he is Senior Fellow at the Culture of Life Foundation, and he dares to answer that question as how we Christians deal with this issue with the people that are so close to us, because we know, Dr. Frank, we do know, pardon me, I'll call you Dr. Moncher. My apologies, sir. We've talked before, obviously. Thank you, my friend. But we've talked about this a lot. And one of the things I try to express is to say, I don't hate homosexuals. I think sin is sin, and I'm a sinner, and I'm pointing up to Jesus and saying, thank you, undeserving of his grace, but nonetheless receive it and embrace it, and am no better in the eyes of God as other sinners. And in saying that, people say, well, even if I express the point of view that I believe homosexuality is a sin, that I believe it's not only a sin, but it's harmful as sin is, but I also believe in defending the institution of marriage being between a man and a woman. And I'm not going to put policies in that will encourage or reward or diminish what is the central foundation of how we raise families in the United States. So, Dr. Frank, what do I do, or what do we do, if someone close to us in our family happens to be a homosexual? What do we do on these issues? How do we talk about them?
Right. It's an excellent question, and I think the place to start is to educate ourselves on not only what homosexuality is in terms of our Christian viewpoint, in terms of sin, but also some of the other things you referenced, which is that it's a very damaging lifestyle to the people involved, that it sets them up for shorter lifespans and increased illnesses, both physical and emotional. And that if we approach our family members with these concerns, my hope is that we might be able to reach them in a way that pointing out the basic kind of Christian truth about the sinfulness might drive them away.
One of the things that always comes back to it is, well, this is how I feel. This is how God made me. And you're saying it's harmful and the consequences of it. So is actually premarital relations are harmful. And why is it that you're highlighting my sin as opposed to other sins? And I do have a rejoinder for it. I have an answer for that. But it seems to me when I talk about, I say, well, people aren't marching up and down the street going, great, having sexual relations outside of wedlock is a good thing, and premarital sex is great. You know, that's the thing to do, carrying banners and the like. So I view it that way. But again, I haven't addressed the heart of the issue there. So what do you say to someone who's very close to you to say, this is how I was made?
Right. Well, you bring up a few critical things. One is that there's a difference between how someone feels, mm-hmm. which is they may indeed feel they were made a certain way or feel like they've always had these attractions, and the truth about how God made them, which we know is God made them male and female, and that certain things that follow from that. So I think that's one thing to be clear about, is that you're not challenging how they feel, but the question of how God made them is something really quite different. The other issue you raise, I think, is a critical one, that the idea of these parades and kind of putting forth an agenda is something that people who are living together or having premarital relations maybe don't do so publicly. But it's worth noting that the research is pretty clear that cohabitation before marriage increases your divorce rate from the already startling and unfortunate 50% up to 60 or 70%. So living together before marriage actually decreases your chance of having a successful marriage. And so for some of the same reasons, not all of them, those sort of premarital sexual relationships are damaging as well.
Is the crux of the matter when we're talking about this issue with people we love who have chosen to be homosexual and may be experiencing feelings, and we know what feelings are. They're temporary, and oftentimes you don't go by your feelings. Not the way
Right.
to go. And Scripture's replete with examples of why not to and commands not to. But bottom line, when you speak to them, I always feel like I'm coming from a place in these conversations that I will hold back the greatest point to make, which is you don't have to be homosexual. If you have these feelings, you can be transformed by God, and you can turn to Him and acknowledge that. And just as you have these feelings that are strong now, the Lord can take those. Is that something that we should be saying and advocating for, or do we get the proverbial Heisman when we do that, the big stiff arm, and say, well, that can't. You advance it, and they dismiss that point of view, and you've ended the conversation.
Yeah, I think that where you ended there is probably true more often than not, that if someone's to the point where they're in the homosexual lifestyle or espousing kind of gay affirmative kinds of things, they've probably turned off any sort of openness to the truth of the Christian point of view. I think, as you were saying at the beginning, that the idea that they've chosen the homosexual lifestyle is very, very true. I always clarify, someone hasn't necessarily chosen the same-sex attraction. Oftentimes that's something that emerges in them developmentally because of disrupted family dynamics or poor, pure relationships, or there's a variety of theories out there about how these things happen. So they don't choose the attraction. They do choose the lifestyle. There's plenty of people who are not same-sex attracted who live chaste lifestyles, and they're not having relations before marriage, and that falls into the realm of choice as well. But yeah, I think to reach most people, if they've gone into the point in your family where they're bringing potential partners around and this sort of thing, they may not be open to the truth of the Christian message. But my hope is that they could be open to the truth of your love and caring for them as a person. You don't want them to be living a lifestyle that's damaging to them, that's setting them up in the long run for failure. The same-sex relationships, as much as people want to say otherwise, that they fail regularly. There's very few examples of any that sustain a lifetime. But everyone thinks they're the exception, but it's simply not the truth. And so we do want to hit them maybe not with the stiff arm of the faith initially, although that certainly can follow when the time is right, but maybe a little bit of a stiff arm with the data and the facts that they're heading down a dangerous path that's unlikely to end in a happy way for them.
Sounds like they'll care how much you know, as friend Aaron Free says to me a great deal. They'll care how much you know when they know how much you care. And
Exactly.
And so when we're doing this, it's first to establish that foundation, to that relationship, to let them know that you love them and you love them unconditionally.
Exactly, yeah. Nobody changes outside of a loving relationship. They don't change because you have a better argument or because you've got a bigger stick. They'll change because they really know that you care and that can open their heart to listen to everything else you have to say.
You talk about praying silently and loving openly. And is that the
Right.
key right there?
I think so, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And should we be specific in our prayers in that estimation? I mean, obviously it's on our hearts, and we see people. It's interesting because doing the show, you're going to be lampooned, and sometimes I'll get frustrated at the parades and just in the fact of just the content of them. It bothers me. And I know there's going to be people lampooning me, saying I'm a hater and all that. And I have friends who have chosen the homosexual lifestyle, and I'm thinking to myself, I am praying for them. And it's funny because one of the first things I want to do, Dr. Frank, is to say that to them. And I realize that saying that to them sometimes puts a greater distance, a bigger wall, because somehow it's saying that I am better than them in the eyes of God, which is not, I'm not saying at all.
Right, you're expressing your concern, and that's how, as a Christian, you would do that. It may be individual to each relationship, but yeah, certainly the prayers silently can be very specific in terms of particular individuals. Our Lord knows each of us individually, and He knows what each of our needs are. And I think people who have found themselves in that lifestyle really do need a lot of support. And the tricky part really is, how do you maintain the relationship? How do you maintain the friendship? Can you go out and have a cup of coffee with a friend in a situation, whereas you might not invite them to your child's birthday party? It's setting boundaries or reaching out in different circumstances where it seems more appropriate.
So lying is not loving, so don't sacrifice the truth in the name of supposed compassion.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, you know how I came up with that? I read your articles, and they're great. And I appreciate you taking on the topic. It is something that it's incredibly tough to deal with, as we just talked about, and not from your case in the sense of addressing it in the way you did with your answers, but just broaching the subject and how to do that and what to do. And we appreciate you, Doctor. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, you're very welcome, and thank you for having me on the show.
Absolutely. We'll have to do it again. The Culture of Life Foundation. I'll put the link up. He is Dr. Frank Moncher, and it's been a privilege. Now, folks, if you want more Nothing But Truth, nothingbuttruth.com. Check it out, nothingbuttruth.com. And live with honor in your life, compassion in your heart, and remember to always keep the faith in Jesus Christ. God knows you. He created you. He loves you. You're worth it wherever you're at. He loves you. AFR Talk.